In the silent corridors of faith, the unspoken sins of empires were born. Beneath crescent moons and cathedral bells, hearts trembled with forbidden devotion. The Ottomans ruled with faith and fire, yet shadows grew beneath their prayers. Inside sacred walls, voices whispered stories that time was told to forget. The nuns who served in silence found themselves trapped between God and the sultan's desire. Their vows became cages, their prayers became secrets, and history buried their pain under marble and gold. This is the untold chapter of power, purity, and control, a story the empire tried to erase, but memory refused to die. If you crave the dark mysteries of our past, subscribe now and tell me, where in the world are you watching from? The East, the West, or somewhere forgotten? The story begins in the early days of the Ottoman rise, when power and faith walked side by side under the golden light of the crescent moon. The empire was not born in glory, it was built slowly through fire, blood, and endless prayers. Villages turned into cities, and cities into thrones, each stone laid by ambition and guided by faith. The sultans saw themselves as chosen protectors, guarding both land and belief, shaping destiny through divine purpose. But behind the walls of this growing empire, another world existed, quiet, sacred, untouched. Across the valleys stood Christian monasteries, where bells echoed softly through the morning mist. Inside those stone halls, nuns lived in silence, their words replaced by devotion, their hearts bound by vows they could never break. They wore white for purity and prayed by candlelight, believing their peace would never fade. Yet shadows were moving closer. When the Ottoman banners rose over the horizon, many nuns prayed for mercy. They did not see soldiers, they saw the end of their world. The Sultan's armies marched not just for power, but for control of land, of faith, of silence itself. Some monasteries opened their doors, hoping kindness would protect them. Others locked themselves within, trusting that faith would be stronger than fear. But faith alone could not stop the sound of boots on stone growing louder each night. Whispers began to spread of sacred walls broken, of holy songs silenced by force. The empire called it victory, but for those women, it was the beginning of a sorrow that had no voice. Their prayers turned into tears, and their hymns faded into silence. Still, even in that silence, light refused to die. Some nuns hid ancient texts beneath the floors. Others fled into forests guided only by faith. Their courage became legend, stories passed quietly from one believer to another, and as the empire rose higher in power, its shadow deepened with secrets untold. Within those shadows, truth waited, the truth of what was taken and what could never be broken. Within the quiet stone walls of the monasteries, time moved differently. Every sound, every breath carried the weight of devotion. At dawn, the nuns rose to pray, their voices soft as wind over water. The world outside was changing, but inside, life followed the rhythm of faith. Candles flickered against old stone, their light trembling on the painted faces of saints. The scent of burning wax mixed with the cold air that drifted through cracked windows. These women had given everything, names, families, desires, for the promise of peace. But peace had become fragile, like the glass of the chapel lamps that swayed in the wind. When the bells rang, their echo carried beyond the convent walls, reaching villages where Ottoman soldiers stood watch. To them, the sound was strange, almost haunting, a faith not their own, yet one that refused to fade. The Sultan's laws allowed prayer, but demanded obedience. Every hymn was a whisper of defiance, every candle a spark of quiet resistance. And though no swords entered the chapel yet, fear already had. It lived in their silence, in the way eyes turned toward the door each time a shadow passed. Some sisters kept diaries, written in hidden ink, lines of hope disguised as scripture. Others buried holy relics beneath the floor, believing faith must be protected like a flame from the wind. In the evenings they sat together, faces pale in the candlelight, speaking not of war, but of endurance. For them, salvation was not found in escape, it was in staying, praying, surviving. Outside, the empire stretched farther with each season. Cities grew and temples fell. Yet here, within these walls, time stood still. The nuns did not measure years by rulers or battles, but by prayers repeated, tears shed, and faith held steady through the quiet storms of history. Their silence was not surrender. It was strength, a voice that spoke without sound, a song that the world could not silence. The empire had grown vast, and its banners touched the edges of forgotten kingdoms, but within its heart, something more dangerous than armies was spreading, belief used as control. The Sultan's court had learned that faith could move men faster than fear, so temples and churches were no longer sanctuaries, they were tools polished and repainted in the image of power. In marble halls, scholars debated scripture not for truth, but for command, each word twisted into law, each verse turned into decree. The priests who once spoke of heaven now knelt before earthly thrones, their blessings sealed with imperial symbols, their prayers whispered through the language of politics. The empire smiled upon piety, but only when it bowed in the right direction. Behind closed doors, alliances were forged not by swords, but by sacred oaths, the kind that bound both souls and nations. Christian leaders were invited into the Sultan's chambers, offered gifts of gold, protection, and influence, so long as they carried his voice through their congregations. Some accepted, some resisted, yet all were watched. The empire had found its perfect weapon, devotion. The faithful obeyed, believing they served God, while their chains were forged quietly beneath the cross. But in the small corners of the empire, whispers began to rise, voices of those who saw what was happening. They spoke of sermons that praised rulers more than saints, of altars that shone brighter with coins than candles. The line between prayer and politics had blurred, and behind every act of mercy lay a shadow of control. The empire didn't need to silence rebellion, it only needed to sanctify it. For the women within the convents, this transformation came slowly, like the dimming of a candle at dusk. Their letters to distant churches went unanswered. Their symbols of faith were inspected, approved, or taken away. The Sultan's inspectors came with polite smiles and silent eyes, ensuring that every vow, every hymn, served the empire's purpose. Faith was no longer just salvation, it was surveillance. Still, among the faithful, not all surrendered. A few priests and nuns began to write in secret, carving truth into hidden manuscripts, burying them beneath altars, hoping that one day the words would be found again. They knew that kingdoms could fall, but belief, pure and unclaimed, might outlast the crown. And so they prayed, not for victory but for remembrance that when faith became a weapon, their silence would remain its final defiance. Ottoman officials began moving silently through the streets, their eyes sharp, their intentions hidden, watching the convents as if the walls themselves whispered secrets they were sworn to uncover. Shadows lingered under arches and along corridors while the nuns went about their prayers, unaware that quiet gazes followed each gesture, each whispered hymn. Candles flickered in stone halls, throwing dancing light on painted saints, and the scent of incense mixed with the cold air drifting through cracked windows. The officials noted which doors opened, which hands touched holy books, and which eyes lingered on forbidden thoughts. Messages from distant churches were intercepted, letters read in secret, intentions measured with cold calculation. The nuns' devotion, once private and sacred, became a landscape for surveillance, every vow and every prayer observed, recorded, and weighed. Some sisters sensed the presence of unseen watchers, their hearts tightening with unspoken fear, yet outwardly continued their rituals, maintaining the fragile balance between piety and danger. Behind the walls, Ottoman scribes kept meticulous notes, cataloguing obedience and resistance alike, mapping faith into control. Small gestures, a bowed head, a lingering glance, a whispered word, became evidence, interpreted by men who saw loyalty and purity as tools of governance. The empire's power was no longer only in armies or edicts, but in the quiet subjugation of belief, in the ability to turn sanctity into observation. Every candle blown out, every hymn sung, carried weight far beyond the convent walls, and the nuns learned that their silence could be both shield and signal. Even in the darkest corners of these sacred halls, courage lingered, hidden beneath veils and robes, expressed in subtle acts of defiance, a touch to a hidden relic, a note tucked beneath a prayer book. While the empire extended its reach, folding cities and villages into its domain, the quiet eyes in the convent reminded the faithful that freedom could be measured not only by what was taken, but by what was preserved. And so each day passed with prayers observed, steps followed, and devotion tested, a silent game of power where faith and fear intertwined, teaching that even in surveillance, strength could endure and hope quietly persist. Within the shadowed halls of the church, whispers moved like wind through empty corridors, carrying secrets hidden behind the rhythm of prayers, confessions unspoken, and thoughts locked within trembling hearts. Priests listened with solemn faces, but their ears caught more than devotion, hearing doubts, fears, and desires no one dared speak aloud. Candles flickered against stained glass, painting fractured light across stone floors, and the scent of incense mingled with the chill that drifted from open windows. In private chambers, nuns confessed sins not to absolution but to conscience, sharing fears of what could come if faith was questioned. Every word spoken in secrecy carried weight, like fragile glass teetering on the edge of revelation, and some confessions hinted at truths that could shatter the calm exterior of holy walls. Outside, the empire pressed closer, banners waving above silent cities, while inside, sacred words became a battleground between piety and hidden agendas. Those who listened recorded what they heard, their notes careful yet filled with interpretation, knowing that secrets could be leveraged, alliances shifted, and lives quietly altered. In the dim light, eyes met in understanding, and in caution, a silent language of unspoken warnings and hidden knowledge, each glance measuring trust and risk. Behind locked doors, manuscripts contained lines that dared not see the open world. Letters buried beneath altars spoke of betrayals yet to come, and the rhythm of daily prayers masked the quiet tension growing within every hall. Each mass, each ritual performed with reverence, hid glances and murmurs that suggested a story beyond the sermons. The faithful, believing in divine guidance, remained unaware of the layers of intrigue and suspicion that had woven themselves into the fabric of their sanctuary. And so the church, meant to be a place of solace, became a labyrinth of secrecy where every confession had its shadow, and every vow carried the potential for revelation, while the walls themselves seemed to hold their breath, guarding the unspoken truths of a faith tested by desire, fear, and the cunning reach of the empire beyond. The empire moved in whispers as priests and Ottoman envoys convened behind closed doors, their words measured, their faces carefully composed, masking the ambitions that lay beneath. Deals were struck with subtle nods, promises of gold, protection, and influence exchanged like delicate chess moves, while the faith of ordinary believers remained unspoken collateral. Candles flickered in dim chambers, casting long shadows across ancient manuscripts, as every gesture, every polite bow, carried hidden meaning. Letters traveled in secrecy, envoys recorded words not meant for the world, and alliances were quietly tested with each handshake. In sacred halls, the rhythm of prayer continued, masking the undercurrent of manipulation, as rituals and blessings became currency in a game of silent control. The faithful, unaware of negotiations shaping their destinies, continued their devotions, while the empire leveraged obedience and purity to consolidate power, ensuring that loyalty served strategy rather than sanctity. Secrets passed from hand to hand, scribed into hidden ledgers, carried in the quiet footsteps of those who knew too much, yet spoke nothing. Each move a balance between diplomacy and deception. Even as sermons proclaimed mercy and virtue, the empire's influence crept into every corner, turning sanctuaries into theaters of power where silent bargains dictated survival. Every candle lit, every hymn sung, now had a double purpose, illuminating not only the devotion of believers, but also the subtle reach of empire. And the line between piety and politics blurred, leaving faith both shielded and exposed. The emissaries left with polite smiles and discreet nods, while the nuns and priests inside carried unspoken burdens, aware that each word uttered, each gesture performed, could ripple into consequences unseen, and the empire's silent deal continued, shaping the destiny of those whose lives were entwined in devotion, power, and the intricate dance of trust and betrayal. The convent lay silent under the silver glow of the moon, bells ringing faintly in the distance, when shadows moved closer and soldiers crossed the threshold of sacred stone, their armor glinting, boots heavy on cold floors, and eyes sharp with authority. Candles flickered violently as doors were pushed open, the air thick with tension, and the nuns froze mid-prayer, sensing the weight of power entering their halls. Whispers ceased, hearts raced, and every gesture carried the awareness of scrutiny, while the scent of burning wax mixed with the cold night air, drifting through cracked windows. The soldiers moved deliberately, marking doors, noting faces, and asserting control without words, while the rhythm of faith was interrupted by the echo of boots and the quiet gasps of those who once felt safe. Some sisters clutched sacred texts to their chest, others knelt, eyes wide, praying not only for divine guidance, but for mercy in the face of authority. Shadows lengthened as each corner was inspected, every hall and chamber becoming territory mapped by the empire, every candle a witness to the new order. The convent, once a haven of silent devotion, became a stage of tension where piety met power and every step was measured, every whisper accounted for. Even in fear, the women tried to maintain composure, balancing reverence and obedience, while outside, the empire's banners loomed over distant cities, signaling that no sanctuary was beyond reach. The night stretched heavy and relentless, and the bells, which had always marked time and prayer, fell silent, swallowed by the presence of control, the air thick with anticipation of what was to come, and the sacred walls held both the courage of the faithful and the shadow of impending change. The convent's quiet halls, once filled with whispered prayers and candlelight, now echoed with the weight of new authority. Every step measured, every gesture observed, as the nuns learned that their lives were no longer their own. Candles flickered against stone walls, casting shadows that seemed to bend under the empire's unseen hand, while the scent of incense mingled with the cold air, carrying the tension of obedience enforced. Sacred texts were catalogued, letters scrutinized, and rituals performed under the gaze of officials who dictated not only what could be said, but how it must be felt. Sisters moved in careful synchrony, their prayers a blend of devotion and compliance, balancing reverence with the subtle fear that any misstep could unravel the fragile order. Outside, the empire's banners reached toward distant villages, signaling that sanctuary offered no immunity. And within these walls, the nuns learned that faith itself could become both shield and shackle. Conversations were whispered in corners, eyes meeting in silent understanding, while the rhythm of daily life bent to the cadence of imposed law, the autonomy of choice slowly eroding under the empire's deliberate control. Small acts, a hidden note, a glance toward a sacred relic, a whispered word of encouragement became profound statements of quiet resistance, the only way to preserve identity without inviting scrutiny. Even in moments of reflection, the sisters felt the pervasive presence of power, the knowledge that every prayer, every bow carried a dual purpose: outwardly obedience, inwardly preservation. The halls, once havens of freedom and piety, became classrooms of endurance, teaching lessons in patience, subtlety, and the endurance of spirit under constraint. And so each day passed with silent vigilance, rituals layered with hidden intent and hearts resilient in the face of authority, a testament to courage and devotion, demonstrating that even when faith is chained, it can endure quietly, shaping a quiet rebellion that speaks through resilience, hope, and the unwavering light of belief. The convent stood in silence, a place once alive with whispered prayers and soft hymns, now haunted by the weight of fear made normal, every stone wall seeming to echo the absence of song. Candles burned low, shadows stretched long and trembling across empty corridors, while the nuns moved quietly, their heads bowed, voices restrained, as if speaking itself could summon consequences. The rhythm of daily life continued, but it was hollow, a mechanical devotion stripped of joy, every gesture a reminder of lost autonomy. Windows framed a cold light that fell upon worn floors, and the scent of extinguished wax lingered, mingling with the chill that drifted through open arches. Conversations were few, whispers rare, for the memory of rebellion remained vivid, each glance carrying unspoken understanding of what had been taken. Rituals were performed with precision, but the hearts behind them beat cautiously, remembering the presence of authority, the invisible eyes that measured loyalty and obedience. The faithful had become shadows of their former selves, walking through stone halls that once celebrated devotion, now holding echoes of voices that dared not rise. Each candle flicker became a fragile pulse of resistance, though faint, and even the walls seemed to sigh under the weight of memories, preserving the traces of hymns that had faded into silence. Outside, the empire's banners continued to wave, a reminder that power could not only dominate bodies, but bend spirits, shaping a world where fear replaced song and obedience became the only safe language. And so within these quiet halls, the nuns carried the fragile fragments of their faith, learning to live with restraint, holding in their hearts the echoes of a devotion once free, as the convent remembered how to breathe but had forgotten how to sing. Those who obeyed survived, moving quietly through the halls that once resounded with devotion, their heads bowed, voices restrained, carrying the weight of compliance like a second skin, while those who resisted vanished into silence, leaving only echoes of courage and the memory of defiance. Candles flickered dimly, shadows stretching across empty corridors, and every gesture became a careful negotiation between survival and conscience. The convent, once a place of sanctuary, now taught lessons in restraint, each ritual performed with mechanical precision, and every prayer measured against the invisible standards imposed by power. Letters and sacred texts were examined under the watchful eyes of authority, the intentions behind every word scrutinized, and obedience became the currency of life. Fear and caution interwove with faith, reshaping the rhythm of daily devotion into a quiet endurance, while whispers of vanished sisters lingered like ghosts, reminding the living that resistance carried a cost. Outside, the empire's banners still waved over distant villages, a symbol that compliance was rewarded and dissent erased, shaping a world where power prevailed and faith fractured. Within the walls, the nuns learned to carry fragments of belief carefully, preserving what they could while submitting to the rules that dictated their every movement, their every word, and their every prayer. Even moments of reflection became measured, each glance a subtle reminder of control, Yet within the silence, a faint pulse of resilience remained, a quiet testament that even when obedience demanded sacrifice, the human spirit could endure, holding in secret the memory of voices that once sang freely. And so life continued under the shadow of authority, survival intertwined with faith, and each day passed with careful vigilance, teaching that the price of obedience was high, but it preserved life, even as it fractured the devotion that had once been whole. Stories moved through the empire like whispers on the wind, carrying the weight of memory through silent corridors and forgotten streets, legends born from what had been hidden, from the voices that dared not speak and the prayers that lingered long after the walls had closed. And while empires rose and fell, these stories persisted, teaching that history does not only record what it can face, but also preserves the traces of what it cannot, the echoes of devotion and courage that survived the shadow of control, whispered in secret to those willing to remember. As each generation encountered the remnants of faith, reshaped by obedience and loss, yet still capable of inspiring awe and reflection, showing that even in silence, the human spirit leaves a mark, and that lessons drawn from forgotten corners of the past may guide the present in ways that official records could never capture, allowing the voices of women who endured, who resisted in subtle acts of hope, to ripple outward through time, a testament to resilience and quiet rebellion, carrying with them the weight of unseen courage, the traces of whispered prayers, and the fragile light of belief that refused to be extinguished, ensuring that even when erased from visible history, the memory of devotion could endure and be felt, shaping the moral landscape of those who chose to listen, reminding the living that legends are born not only from triumph, but from the silent persistence of faith, the quiet defiance of ordinary lives under extraordinary pressure, and the courage to endure when survival demanded more than strength alone, leaving behind echoes that the empire could not silence and time could not erase. The women who endured within convent walls left behind more than memories. Their quiet resilience became a language of survival, a testament to the courage that persisted even when faith was tested and voices silenced. Their tears unnoticed by the world, but woven into the fabric of history, carrying lessons of hope and defiance, demonstrating that the human spirit can endure in subtle acts of rebellion and preservation, that devotion can survive even under the weight of obedience imposed by power, and that what is erased from visible records still shapes the conscience of those willing to remember. While the golden light of morning filtered through high windows, illuminating worn stone floors, traces of whispered prayers, and the fragile glow of belief that refused to vanish, reminding the living that the legacy of courage is often hidden in silence, that stories passed through time carry the weight of unseen struggles, and that the mark left by these women, their courage and their faith endures, shaping the way future generations perceive devotion, hope, and the quiet strength required to preserve one's spirit against the unrelenting forces of control and fear, leaving a reflection that even when obscured, the light of faith continues to ripple outward, echoing through hearts willing to listen, honor, and carry forward the enduring lesson that resilience often whispers louder than triumph, and that the true power of devotion can survive in hidden acts, in subtle defiance, and in the tears that history may forget, but the human heart will always remember.